This is the area of Wailua, where this takes place. Now, a very, very long time ago, way before Captain Cook, there was a chief of this island, and his name was Kali'ikoa. And Kali'ikoa can be translated as brave chief. And he was the chief of the entire island. He was mostly in charge of what's called the Puna district. Now, every island, the southeast part of the island is always called Puna as a district. Today on the Big Island, it's still called that. In ancient Kauai, that included this area of Kapa'a, Wailua, and Lihui. All of that was the Puna district. And this was a chief. He was the highest chief in the island, but he was mainly in charge of this area of Puna. Well, he had his main place that he lived was right by the Wailua River. And it was close, and it was beautiful, even more beautiful than it is today, because there weren't any houses around there. There were no roads, and there were no bridges. It was quiet, it was peaceful. The gentle breezes would come down sometimes from the mountains. The ocean breezes would come in, of course, but never too strong. There was beauty all around. It was a great place to live, except the chief had a problem, because he slept in his house, and near his house, almost where they are today, were these great groves of coconut trees. You know where the cocoa palms is, where that is, most of you know that. That with all those coconut palms, that all used to belong to the king, all the ancient kings. All those coconut trees belonged to them. Well, they didn't sleep in it, that wasn't wise, but so he had his hale, his hut, near the river, and everything was wonderful until what started to happen. Nobody knows why, but suddenly what happened, there was somebody throwing coconuts onto the roof of the king's hale. Hale is a word that means hut or house. And it would break through the roof, startle the chief, okay, king or chief sometimes. Anyway, it would startle the chief. He'd leap up, he'd run outside, this would be the middle of the night, and he'd run outside and some coconut palm would be thrown right in front of his feet, and he'd trip over it, fall into the dirt, and be extremely upset. Wouldn't be able to sleep for the rest of the night. Wouldn't be so bad one time, you can maybe see, but there were no coconut trees over him. And this started happening night after night after night. He'd be sleeping in the middle of the night. Suddenly, wham, crash, there would come a coconut smashing through the roof, almost hitting him. He'd leap out, run outside, trip over a coconut frond, time and time and time again. Well, there had to be some kind of bandit, or there had to be some kind of mischievous rascal who was doing this, so the king set guards. And they guarded all around the king's hut. Every night, same thing happened. The guards didn't see anyone. The king was getting really upset. He couldn't even sleep there anymore. He went off to sleep on the dunes at Momoiki. Now, maybe you realize it or not, but we have sand dunes at different places on this island. And one of the places used to be the very, very ancient name called Momoiki, which actually means small pearl. But the area of this was Lydgate, if you know Lydgate Park. And there's lots of sand dunes right along there. Well, the king went out there and he'd sleep on the sand dunes all day and then try to get his work done during the night and make the people come to see him. And his people started getting really upset because they had to work during the day and they couldn't stay up all night, so things weren't working. The king was going to have to stay at Wailua. That was the seat of his power, as a king. And the guards, so he got more guards. Finally, one night, one of the guards, whose name was Kalu. Now, Kalu can mean different things. It can also mean, on Kauai, there was a special type of grass that was used for roofs of the huts. And it was very famous on Kauai alone, and that was called Kalu. Well, that was the name of this guard. And he decided, for some reason, to go in among the coconut trees and stand watch, because maybe this person was coming through the grove. There were other guards at the mouth of the Wailua River and others upriver, even some across the river. So this guard, Kalu Kalu, late at night, he sees a rat run by, start gnawing on a coconut. A little while later, an owl swoops through. He sees a coconut tree shake like an earthquake hit it, which he thought was strange because none of the other trees were shaking. And then he looked again and he saw this one tree not just shaking, but it seemed to be stretching like it was waking up. And as he kept watching, the tree started to grow. And it grew taller and taller and taller and taller, way up above all the other coconut trees. And then it leaned way over toward the river until the head of it was hanging over the chief's hut. And then whoop, it wasn't just a coconut dropping. It looked like it was going so fast it was thrown. And smash, and there was the whole thing again. And the king jumped up and ran out and got tripped by a coconut frond. But the guard saw that the tree threw down a coconut frond just right in front of the chief. So next morning, all the guards came around the chief, and one at the river didn't see anything, the one upriver didn't see anything, but the guard who was in the coconut grove, he reported what he saw. He said, it's got to be a kupua tree. Now, in the old days, kupua is a word that has a lot of different meanings, and one of them is like a trickster. And in old Hawaii, they had the idea that there were certain people with the power to change their form. And they might do mischievous tricks on people. And so that's what this seemed to be. The word could also be used for a shaman, but this person was acting more like just a trickster. So, or this tree was. So the chief said, cut it down, chop it up, burn the thing. And so they went, and all the woodcutters that worked for the chief came, and they started cutting the tree and chopping away at it. And they chopped and they chopped and they chopped and they chopped, and wood chips were flying all over the place and piling up. But the tree was still there. Because every time they would chop and this wood chip would fall out, suddenly it would heal. So no matter how much they cut it, no matter how much wood piled up, the tree stayed there. And so, they weren't able to do anything. And so the same problem cut by. The tree kept throwing the coconuts and so forth. So the king finally, on the advice of this guard, Kalu Kalu, sent out the word. He really couldn't leave Wailua area. So he sent out the word all through his whole district, pleading for someone to come and chop down this tree. And if they did, he would give them his daughter's hand in marriage. Now his daughter's name was Kalili, which is the name of a beautiful violet, a native violet that's only found on Kauai and on Oahu. And it's usually found way, way up at Waialeale in the bogs. But that was her name because she was so beautiful. And they could marry her and be the successor to his chiefdom. And people came from all over the place. And there was all day long people were chopping, and the wood chips were piling up, and people would take them home as firewood, and the tree would still be there. And then finally the tree started getting a little trickier. Sometimes he'd throw coconuts at a woodcutter and brain him, knock him on the head and make him unconscious. Sometimes he'd let himself seem like he was going to be cut, and he'd seem to get weaker and weaker, and he'd just start to fall over, and at the last, everybody'd be cheering, and just at the last minute, whoop, come on back up, he was okay. Well, this was just going on and on. Meanwhile, way up in the mountains, up by the cliffs at Waialeale, which is our big mountain up there, down by the cliffs there, lived a young man whose name was Nale Maile. Now, Nale Maile means Maile lays. The Maile is a lei that we wear here on this island, all around the islands, but it started on Kauai. It's made of leaves, of a vine called Maile. Has a beautiful smell. Anyway, that was the name of the young man. And he was living with his grandmother, Nahale Maile, which means house of Maile. And he asked her, "What's all that shouting I hear down in the valley?" And his grandmother told him about the kupua tree. He said, "Well, how is that possible?" "Well," she said, "I'll tell you the story. It's really one of the brothers of Maui." Now, if you remember Maui, who is the most famous shaman kupua in all of Polynesia, and he used to live here. Some people say he was born on Kauai. And there was a story, which I'll tell another time, about how Maui was trying to gather all the islands together, and he had his 8 brothers with him, and they were supposed to keep looking forward, but at the last minute they didn't, and the line broke. He was trying to capture a whale to bring the islands together, and that the line broke, the islands scattered, the whale got away, and Maui got so mad that he turned all his brothers to stone. Well, almost all of them. 7 of them got turned to stone. You can still see them today. They're right by Lydgate Park on this end, right by the heiau. They're in the water. They've got petroglyphs carved all over them because they are stones of power. And those are the brothers of Maui, rather. Well, one brother, he was the youngest, the 8th. He had so much mana that he did not let himself be turned into stone, but instead turned into a coconut tree. And in order not to let Maui know, he just stayed asleep for many, 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 many years. And this was the kupua brother of Maui who was now causing all the problem. And so Maile, the young man, was saying, wow, I wish I could go down there and chop that tree down because I've seen the chief's daughter and she is a looker. Well, he didn't put it that way, but Hawaiian slang of the time. And so his grandmother said, "She is worthy of you, so I'll tell you what to do." So she told him exactly what he had to do. So he went down and presented himself before the chief. And she says, "You're just a young man. How do you expect to do this?" He says, "All I can do is fail, and maybe I'll win. Maybe I'll do it." So the chief gave him permission to try. Well, now he didn't chop away like a frenzy like the others. He placed every chop really carefully. Whoom. And the tree tried to throw coconuts at him. But he was well trained in lua, in the martial arts, and so he was able to dodge. And then the tree tried to throw the chips at him because he was hitting out big chunks, and the tree tried to make those hit him. But he was waiting for that. His grandmother had warned him. So he dodged out of the way, and none of the chips hit him. And so it kept going. And then the tree started, getting careless. In other words, this was what the young man was waiting for and what his grandmother was waiting for, because the tree was playing its tricks again of pretending to fall and being more and more daring every time. So this one time, the tree allowed itself to pretend to fall until the crown of the tree just touched the ground. And everybody again was cheering and then started to moan just before the tree started up again. And then the young man, who was wearing all kinds of maileles, put them off and threw them on the crown of the tree, where they instantly rooted themselves and held the tree down. That wasn't enough, though, because he had to know the kupua's name in order to really have power, and his grandmother had told him. And so he ran up to the tree and he said, "Tree, I know you. You are Niu Lolo Hiki," which means crazy moving coconut tree. Okay? But that was the name. And because he knew the name, the tree got instantly weak, stayed down on the ground, finally fell completely, was chopped up, burned, and done away with. The young man did marry Kahili, the beautiful daughter of the chief, Kahili Koa. Now, Kahili Koa, he stayed in Wailua, never again walked under a coconut tree for any reason whatsoever. And all of those coconuts that they new Lolo Hiki threw down, they eventually took root. And some of their descendants are still growing there. And if you're not careful, and you walk under those coconut trees, anytime you're likely to get hit on the head by one of those coconuts, and that's how we know the story's true.